Cool. He was just elected in school.
Oh, nice. Oh, yeah, but it'll be fun.
Great guy.
Yeah, the guys' election later.
Well,
Ours.
they weren't meant to be. There was a step.
We're living Nick, I said.
Oh, okay. You did, that'd be easy to do, so.
Okay, I think we're all set up on the tech end. I've got a little past 5:15 by my time, so thank you everyone for making it to TFSC, kind of short notice. I haven't been together since like Halloween time. It was like just yesterday, so it's great to be back with everyone. I don't think we really have any announcements. I guess just a bit of an overview of why you're all here. So the TFSC, for the fall, we did a lot of the FSC, so Fees, Strategies, Review of College of Agriculture and College of Architecture, Planning and Design. Obviously, we wrapped all that up, and then now we're moving to the T part of TFSC, so we're talking about tuition. So I don't really have much other background to give. I don't want to take.
I think that's, you framed it out really well there. I've never thought about it that way. That's cool. Would it be fair? We do have some, oh, go ahead.
Could we do super quick introductions?
Yeah.
Yes.
I can start. My name is Caleb Sal. I am the outgoing student body president and the co-chair of TFSC.
My name is Kate Thomas. I am the outgoing speaker of the Student Senate, the other co-chair of this meeting. Jack, you want to?
Jack O'Malley, incoming student body vice president, will be taking Jess's job here pretty soon, so.
Ethan Erickson, vice president, administration and finance. Tom Slutty, CIO.
Becca Zeppelin, AVP for budget planning.
Tom Slade, students.
Debbie Mercer, interim provost, but my real job is dean of the College of Education.
Robert Bruckner, outgoing senator of College of Art and Science.
Jessica Cleo, the whole student body VP.
Samantha Sushanik, incoming assistant chair.
Christine Cuesta, the new speaker of the student senate. Drew Bellamy, College of Education representative.
Dakota Broughton, former strategic oversight chair and engineering representative.
Jacob Long, former student service teacher. Vince Weber, faculty representative, instructor at K-State Salina.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marcus Cade, representing the Grad Caucus for Student Senate.
I'm Kelvin Peterson, representing Ag Caucus.
You want to kick it over to the Zoom?
Hello, I'm Keenan Lippert. I am the current student government president at K-State Salina.
And Brandon?
I'm Brandon Kermer. I'm the representative for the College of Architecture, Planning and Design.
Awesome, thanks guys.
Well, if it's okay, I just go ahead and kind of get started. So what we wanted to have a conversation with you all today is to kind of start thinking about, to Jacob's point about the tuition side of the house, and potentially why the university might have a tuition rate increase. And so what we thought we would do today is spend a little time going through some of the background, both in terms of how the university operates, changes that we've seen in both tuition and state funding over time, sort of what you might hear as the legislature wraps up its work for funding the institution. And then sort of the investment areas and things that we're focusing on as needs for the university moving into next fiscal year. Might make it kind of clear what we're primarily talking about is tuition for the Manhattan campus. And Salina has a separate process that they go through when they look at their tuition rates and their tuition planning. I'm sure you can provide us all input on that particular piece. But going through a lot, please ask questions. I'm happy to answer anything that we can. If we can't, we're going to come back again next Tuesday, and we're happy to. Anything pops up in between or anything that we can answer, we're happy to chat with you all and see what we can provide.
Could I put it in context? The students are being briefed. Why? Why are the students being briefed and what are the expectations of them?
Sure. So like Jacob mentioned, where we're at, or sorry, Caleb. I'll take look at you every time and I see Jacob instead of Caleb. So this is the time frame that we normally go get close to going to the Board of Regents. Board of Regents is the one that ultimately has the authority of whether a tuition rate increase is approved or not. And so we're at that planning stage of where we've. Let me back up even further. When we're thinking about FY25 budget planning, we start all the way back in the fall. And when we do that, we're looking at what are potential state funding requests that we might ask the Kansas Board of Regents to support for us and also as a system. That work then flows through and the K Board will submit that funding request to the governor. The governor will consider it. She will then issue her budgetary recommendations to the legislature in January. From there, the legislature takes over. They look at everybody's budget. They will look at the requests. They will decide what funds they want to appropriate or what programs they want to provide funding for. And so then that's sort of the cycle for our state funding lines. Then at the same time, beginning really probably in the December, January timeframe, we're looking at, and this is some stuff that we'll cover, is what's our enrollment outlook as a university. Primarily, again, we're talking about the Manhattan and online campuses for K-State. And then thinking about what are our investment areas that we want to have. So what would that look like in terms of how are we investing in our people? Are there particular areas of the institution that we want to invest dollars into? So we wrap all of that up together and think about a potential tuition rate increase. First read of that would go to the board in May for the May meeting, and then is acted upon in June, their June board meeting. And so today, what we wanted to cover is just sort of have a preliminary discussion about some of the background and why we might potentially come with a tuition rate increase. We'll talk about that. And then the next Tuesday, the request would be to consider that final rate request and recommend to support it or not support it. I think that it's not whether necessarily to approve or disapprove, it's whether you support it or some other conversation that we need to have as an institution. We then take that to the board and go from there. So,
Well, what I was impressed with is one, all year long, that the students get input. But the second is that the K Board is so anxious to get your read and input on the administration's funding request. And so I'm trying to re-articulate the power that the group has to articulate to K Board what you think. Thank you. Okay.
Caleb. Okay. Caleb. I get called Eric and Aaron and Nathan a lot, so.
I'm only going to my family, so I'm used to all the names.
Depends on how far you have.
I'm usually trying to think of Joseph Caleb.
Yeah, there you go. He's in trouble and how quick his mom gets the name. So kind of describe what we wanted to cover today. Just a quick budget overview, our setting process, and then how we're going to put all the pieces together at the end of the day. So wanted to provide some context for the university's overall budget. What you see here is the FY24 budget for the entire university. And so you should have the slides in front of you if you're interested. What this looks at is sort of the funding sources for our operations. So it breaks it down between state appropriations, student tuition. Those two buckets is what we refer to as our general use budget. That's our most flexible operating dollars that we have. All the other line items that you see down there are called restricted use, and those dollars come in for very specific purposes. And are very limited in the usage that we have available to do those things with them. So when we're looking at our operations, about 45% of our overall budget comes from state and student tuition, very significant portion of it. But we do have other dollars that flow through and support the university in varying ways. You'll look then, tuition is a big component of that. So what you might think about is what has happened with tuition and state funding over time. This is a look kind of retrospectively of how state funding and tuition funding has changed over about a 10-year period. And so you'll see we refer to this as the scissor graph in all of our other state institutions, because everybody looks a lot like this. So it's not just K-State. This is all state institutions. It's also pretty common nationwide. As state legislatures opted to disinvest in higher education, then other options had to come into play, and tuition became part of that way to backfill those disinvestments. So if you go all the way back to 2009, 57% of the budget was funded from state dollars. That's the black line. And about 43% of the operating budget was from the tuition, which is the purple line. Go back even further, those percentages go up, even the disparity goes up quite a bit differently as well. So as the state disinvested from higher ed, we had a couple of actions happening in there from 2011 through about 2017, 2018. One, we had enrollment growth happening at the university. So we were growing pretty heavily, moving forward with higher enrollments. And we also saw some tuition rate increases during that period of time. Sometimes pretty significant tuition rate increases were taking place. We were starting at a very different base of costs. And so looking at raising the tuition rates in there. You'll notice a very steep decline that comes into the university starting about 1819. That really is a reflection of our enrollment drop that we saw. So in this view, what we're reflecting there and what we talk about quite publicly is the university has reduced its budget by about $70 million due to enrollment declines throughout that period of time. And so very significant impact on our operations as a university, but something that we manage to every year. I think that's actually something that is very difficult, very hard, very difficult decisions were made, but we were able to balance our budget every year in relation to the fiscal realities that we were at. You'll note then in 22, 23, 24, we're starting to see both an increase in tuition revenues coming in and also some state funding increases. So we've had some recent success in prior years for additional funding from the state to support our operations. So we're actually pretty close to parity between state funds and tuition funds to support the university. To where we're at for 2024. So I give you all that just so you understand just sort of how important both revenue sources come into play for us. And those are our most flexible dollars that we have to support all the actions that we have at the university. So where we're at for FY25, let's start with the state. And actually, we've got a very detailed line item listing for you here as a separate handout. So we have had very good success with the state in increasing our funding this year. However, it's been for very targeted initiatives. Those initiatives are, and you can kind of I'll walk through them a little bit here. But they've been for either one-time actions or for specific initiatives, like one of those that's on the slide is the Kansas Water Institute. That's going to be that's a $5 million appropriation that's coming to the university, but it's for water research across the state. And so those dollars are not flexible in terms of impacting our base operations. If you look at that first line item, we've got need-based aid. They have bumped that need-based aid line item up for us this year, which is fantastic for us to be able to support students with need. But then they also then made a secondary action that actually impacted us and reduced an alternate program that exists out there for aid, which is the Kansas Comp Grant. And the legislature directed that this higher ed, has to split the funding of that comp grant 50-50 with community college technical or private schools. So that actually impacts us a little bit this year. and drives us to need additional need-based aid so that we can hold harmless all the students that we've already promised need-based aid actions to. So it's good news, but it also comes with some strings attached that impact us ultimately as we think about scholarshiping. All the numbers that you see on here are system-wide numbers. So K-State gets a component of this. This is not all of our dollars. For example, that investment in student success and retention, it's $8.5 million coming to the system. For K-State, that's about $2 million that will come and help support student success, student retention activities. The legislature continued to fund some dollars for cybersecurity and IT infrastructure. That's $7 million, placed about $1 million for K-State. What we'll talk about is there's a much bigger need than that for the institution. So we think about how we respond to the recent cyber incident that we had and all the future forward improvements that we need to make for the university when it comes to cyber. We've got some, system has some facility demo dollars, some capital renewal dollars. Those are all helping us address our deferred maintenance, which is an issue at the university and all of the system. So they're continuing those funding programs. One thing that I will note that we did not get that we had asked for, which impacts us ultimately as we think about our operating budget, is we had asked for this line item called mandatory utility and contract cost increases, basically an inflationary ask. They don't like to call it inflationary. For some reason, the legislature never wants to fund that. So we were working to see if we could frame it around, these are mandatory cost increases that we have for salary contracts, utility contracts. Governor actually cut it in half from what we originally requested, and then the legislature denied it completely. So unfortunately, those are dollars that would have been very flexible for us to help us with our budget planning for FY25. There was an item on DEI that has been removed, thankfully. We've got that comp grant dollars are added in here. We actually need another $4 million at the system, and that will be coming and worked on through the omnibus session. We had some dollars that helped relieve some debt service that we had from for the NBAF research facility. So we've got some dollars coming in there. One-time funds to help support the new Global Center for Grain and Food Innovation. I look at you because you're having. That's a huge project. That $25 million will actually help support the current funding gap that we have for that $210 million project. We have $5 million for the Water Institute we mentioned earlier. Some planning dollars for a new animal diagnostic laboratory. And then we've got some debt items added in there for some new facilities that came in. The last one that we'll talk about is that's highlighted in there is the state aid plan. One of the complications that we get is publicly what's talked about at the state and the governmental level is that there's potentially the legislation would approve and the governor recommended a 5% state employee pay plan. Part of the complication is when they say that, they only fund the state funded portion, the state funded positions. So all of our tuition funding, which I mentioned earlier, is about 50% of our GE budget. Universities have to find a way to cover that increased cost. So we can either do that by spreading the peanut butter around and lowering how much we actually provide as a salary increase, or finding a way through tuition revenue to backfill that cost. The thing then that the legislature did, which was even more fun, is they came back and said, well, we'll give everybody else 5%, but we're only going to give you guys 2.5%. Okay, well, okay. Okay, I don't know. We're not quite sure exactly why they did that, but that was just an angle that they took at the tail end of the regular session. So we're going to go back and ask for that additional funding to get us at least to what the state funds normally is at that 5% salary plan. So I go through all this in pretty good detail to help you understand. We did have a very successful year with state in terms of additional state funding, and we're very, very grateful to the state and the legislature for providing that. Unfortunately for us, as we think about our operating budget, there was very little provided that gives us flexibility in how we manage that operating budget and where we need to invest for the institution moving forward. Went through a lot. Is there any questions on that? Okay, good.
Yeah, so was that only K-State that didn't receive the 5%?
No, all of the higher ed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we were carved out specifically, yeah.
But did you say you're gonna have, that could be added back?
They're gonna ask for it to be added back during the omnibus, yeah.
Okay. And when is that?
It starts, 25th, 26th, yeah. And then it's done by the May 8th. Okay. So not till late April, early May. Yeah.
Is the DEI 5% gone, or can that come back on the list?
You never say never, but it is gone in terms of they passed this House Bill 2105. And then remove this proviso in the appropriations bill. So this bill, the 2105 is the DEI legislation that was passed. It also supports the recent board policy that was adopted in May on DEI as well. But right now, there's no financial penalty for any institution for not complying in some fashion. Keep going. So we want to walk through all the different levers that we deploy when we think about tuition and tuition revenue planning for the institution. So one of the areas that we want to look back on is what is our enrollment projection for the next fiscal year? And so we're always, we start working with Karen Goose. She's our Vice Provost for Enrollment Management. We start working with her back in the fall to understand how are we looking as a university for applications, admissions. As we get further along in that enrollment funnel process, we start looking to see how are we up in housing contracts, which is a very good determination of yield of potential students, even to the point where we're at today, where we're looking at student implementations as well. So we're trending very positively as an institution for enrollment increases next year. That's the good news. Unfortunately, the complicating news that we have, and I think a lot of you are probably familiar with this, is the challenges that we've had with the FAFSA at the federal level. Rolling out the new FAFSA, the easier and simpler form that was supposed to come out, we're still struggling with. So what we are cautious on is that even though we are showing positive numbers, we have a lot of students in the pipeline that don't actually know what their financial aid package is going to look like. So we're suspecting that we're going to have quite a bit higher melt than we might normally, because as students hear about what's my financial package, they may make other decisions than deciding to come to K-State, going to community colleges, another institution, or taking a gap year. We've heard about some of those complications as well. So when we are budgeting, we're taking the budget view of how we want to think about enrollment next year. We're taking a very conservative view, just because we don't know exactly what's going to happen and what the impact is going to be from FAFSA. That's the piece that really sort of pulls us back a little bit from understanding the positive information that we've got in the other areas. So we're looking at our enrollment. What is that going to change and potentially be different next year? We then are looking at where are we investing. So we know from the state, the dollars that we've got there, we're looking at our enrollment. Are we going to be up in enrollment, generating some additional tuition revenue potentially? But what are our needs as an institution next fiscal year? So we know we have more in the need-based scholarship. So we're going to continue to advocate during the omnibus from the state to provide more funds to the Kansas Comp Grant so that we can remain whole. We know that we've got some funds from the state. How do we potentially augment what we know we've been provided as a potential salary plan for the institution? You'll note there, we talk about this a lot. If you look at just average faculty salaries, we rank pretty low in comparison to our peer institution, number 9 of 11. And so that our peer and Esper institution. So we have true need in how do we have a comprehensive salary plan to continue to recruit, retain some of the best, brightest faculty at the university. And then we also have our student retention efforts. So we were very lucky this year, and we were able to advocate for this funding to continue. Right now, that has been advertised and talked about both at the K-Board level and in the governor's office as sort of an annual look to understand, are we going to continue to fund that or not? So we were able to successfully get that. We have a governmental relations team that works really hard. We also have a need this year to invest in our operations. That's probably our biggest area that we're gonna have to focus on. So I mentioned earlier those inflationary cost increases. So we are seeing increases in our utility bills, just general operations, software cost increases have gone up. And so we're seeing a need to invest in that area. We also have, based on our, again, recent cyber incident, we've got to invest in our IT operations. That's the basic fundamental infrastructure that runs this whole ship. So if you think about not just classes that you take, it's the research we conduct, it's the partnerships that we have across the state, it's paying our people on time with the systems that we have. That infrastructure we have not sufficiently invested in as an institution in many years. I think the cyber incident really brings that to the forefront for us. Those are things that we've got to actually, in order for us to be successful and achieve the strategic plan and goals, we've got to make sure that we've got that IT infrastructure in place that supports the institution. So you're seeing some fairly significant investments in that area in terms of security of systems, and especially around the student personal data. We want to make sure that we have a consistent experience in all of the classrooms for the students. So working to make sure that we've got those classroom plans in place. We've got then areas that we're modernizing for campus enterprise environments, including cases. So I'm sure everybody loves getting in cases and monkeying around in there, right? I know, yes. So
See, not one face.
yeah, I know. God, I might get back on that.
Let's do it.
So one of the things that these investments this year set the bedrock foundation for is us to make the necessary work to modernize our core ERP. So basically, think about our HR systems, our finance systems, and our student systems. These investments help us set that plan in place to move down that road. So it's a future benefit to students in terms of what the experience will look like down the road in terms of integrating and interfacing with the modern student system. Not something that's built on about 20 plus decade old code, which you enjoy working lots of fun. Yeah. So those are the biggest investment areas that we have next year. And I can't underscore, and Thomas can certainly share in sort of any of the experiences. The cyber incident really, we want to think of it as sort of a one and done. The reality is it's not. It continues every day. And we've got to take those necessary actions to harden our perimeter, secure access, and then prepare our systems for the future so that we can really provide a much more secure environment for us to move forward. Those are our key investment areas for the institution next year. So I don't know, Thomas, if you want to maybe dive into that.
Yeah, well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for your time. I think as you think of the enterprise systems, think of it from this perspective. If you're not old enough to learn, these systems are older than you. You really put that in perspective. Really, right? I mean, that is it. So these systems were developed and introduced on our campus, and many of our business processes rely on them prior to the date that many of your friends, maybe your classmates were born. So they're very old systems, they're very cumbersome systems. They take a lot of integrations behind the scenes. I think when we've met with students, we hear the concerns of, I'm enrolled into a class, but I can't, or I get admitted, but it takes me a day or two to get enrolled into a class. Then when you get enrolled in your class, it takes a day or two to actually be able to get your housing assignment. And if you've ever done that, then it takes a day or two to get actually in the parking system, because these are very complex systems that are not built on modern dynamic connections that go back and forth. So lots of work there. But when you think of a cyber attack, I think we can sort of summarize it in maybe one sentence. It's probably as bad as you think or worse than you think. If you think of the major events that have occurred, anybody follow the United Healthcare issue? That's what we're worried about that. So United Healthcare, MGM, Caesars, the pipeline, Colonial Pipeline's a great example. Maybe people weren't aware, Colonial Pipeline's a major oil pipeline that exists. I think it serves 1/3 of the nation, getting oil back and forth. That was shut down because of the major attack. United Healthcare is one that you may not be aware of, but it's certainly going to impact you. It's one where they're calling it a double or triple extortion. So basically, these companies are being held hostage. They're being forced to pay money to get their systems back online. When they do pay, they get them back online, but they quickly take them back offline again because the companies, the managers continue to sort of have these footholds in these organizations. I think as Ethan mentioned, for us, we continue to see those daily attacks that happen in our environment. They're very well structured, they're very well funded, and they're persistent. They're very, very talented. Certainly something that you'll experience in your careers as you move on from here. Ethan and I were just in a meeting today, and I think the number was 76% of organizations that have experienced an attack like we have will experience another one in less than 2 years. So how do we make sure those systems are resilient enough that if they were to be brought offline, how do we get them back online quickly? We are as secure as our weakest link. So when you think of your classroom experience, think of some of those devices that are really, really old. Or think of that sensor that sits in the wall. You walk in and go, wow, what is that thing? If it's connected to the internet, there's potentially some attack that could happen. We have a lot of maturity to do. I think that investment in IT is something that's we've shared earlier. This is something that you couldn't have predicted probably 5 years ago. The idea that the world has changed so dramatically, where we went from empowering an organization now defending that organization has radically changed. Even just to name some of the sensors that we purchased, just to get them beyond the attack is about $1.4 million. That's something that's an ongoing expense. And we have to do it because the bad actors know what tools we use. They have these zero-day attacks that take place, and they're known to defeat the tool sets we use. And we do have a plan in place to secure the perimeter access systems. And it just takes investment, it takes people, it takes resources, it takes the talent that we're essentially developing in our classrooms and students that we're seeing across the state.
So when we think about budget planning, we're putting the whole package together. There's multiple levers that we're looking at pulling. And so we've sort of defined our investment areas next year. So that's investing in our people, investing in our operations. So in order to make that all work at the end of the day, get through grinding that sausage, what we look at is what are the levers that we have. So in this case, we're looking at potential tuition rate increase. We're factoring in our enrollment growth, but understanding it's positive signs, but we still have a lot of uncertainty due to the FAFSA challenge. We've got some state funding. We've been successful in other areas of the budget, but not necessarily on the operations side, which is where we need the help. And then quite frankly, we're looking at budget cuts to the institution. So the main message I want to put here is this isn't all on the students. I want to be very clear about that. We look at this as both an internal investment that we have to make as an institution, but how do we then balance all the levers so that we're not inadvertently reducing capacity for other mission areas of the university that are existing and ongoing, and balancing it all together. So those are sort of the 4 levers that we're looking at as we balance our FY25 budget for to account for the investments in our people. So I've covered a lot, talked at you a lot. We've gone through quite a bit. What questions do you have? Yeah.
So you're saying tuition increase, but also getting enrollment.
Correct.
So with that, like in Colorado, my education is probably almost the same. We're at Fort Hays where it's cheaper. But Clinton came and talked to us at SGA saying, oh, we're getting more. If you go to more rural communities, especially, they're going to Fort Hays to get that cheaper education. And then when they see a tuition increase, that could be scary towards some of those kids too. And then also like the cyber attack. I don't know if it was my ignorance or other or the university, but we as students, I don't feel like got told what was happening during that. So
That was, that last piece is sort of by design. One of the things that we were very cautious on is making sure we protected the brand of the university. And so we were very careful to minimize the experience, impact of the experience that you might have seen in the classroom. And both our IT folks and our faculty worked miracles to make sure that we continue to conduct instruction, especially since one of the key technologies we had at this media site was down for a month or a month and a half. So we worked very hard. The balance that we have in terms of internal communications or coming to you all and explaining everything to you is it's very sensitive, and we can't really broadcast out exactly what all happened and how the bad actors got in or how they're continuing to get in and sort of the impacts that we have. So it was by design, honestly. And I know that's a hard message to hear because everybody wants to know exactly what happened and where that went. But we're very cautious and trying to be very in sort of minimizing how much information. I'm not trying to call them out specifically, but we did have a very detailed conversation with your leadership as well. So we did want to make sure we provided that context to your SGA leadership individuals. But also asked them to be very confidential with that too. So wanted to provide them at least a more detailed context than what we'll probably publicly talk about. And it's not just students. We've been the same with our internal faculty and staff as well. So we've just been, it's a balance, unfortunately. I think you were first. No, go ahead, Caleb.
I'll take it.
Oh, he's got better hair. So we got half of what we asked for the IT stuff, right? I see 15 down 7.5 million of the actual budget. I'm not a computer scientist, but is that mostly going to software, or what is that being used for?
So the IT cyber, the 7.5.
Oh, so actually that was public funding. That was earmarked for our campus. It's split. So we only get a fraction of it.
About $1 million.
And that $1 million was actually earmarked for identity. So part of the challenge we have on this institution is modern identity is what they consider role-based. So as you join our campus, we put you in different roles, understanding what permissions you get behind the scenes. So if you're a student, you get a role based on a student. If you get a GA ship or something, we assign that role, you get permission to assign. K-State, as many institutions have done, would assign roles specifically to you as an individual. And imagine doing that at 25,000. So what happens is as you move from organization to organization, next semester you're not a GA or you're no longer GA as a smart student, you would lose those permissions. For us, we had to individually go and remove those. So that money was actually earmarked for an identity project really across the state, and KU's in a very similar situation. What we, however, did was do a small shift. After the cyber event, we were required, we had to opt in to purchase some of the tools that we can use to track activity across our institution. We either had to come up with that new money or find a source. We actually reallocated this money to pay for that sensor, recognizing that the new increase that we're requesting will put back on the identity portion. So that identity portion allows us to move some of those integrations more tightly together, so that when we do see something goofy with your account and permissions, we know that as a student that maybe a GA, you shouldn't be accessing financial records. So we allow these systems to sort of play a modern role. But that's a very good question.
So you mentioned budget cuts as a component of budget setting. Were there any specific areas you were looking at targeting for that?
So the way we work is, it's actually university-wide, to be candid. And so we have a mechanisms through our university budget model that we'll deploy. In essence, every unit across campus will have some type of a reduction that would be placed.
And you had talked a little bit in previous meetings, but would those budget cuts potentially include like employees, personnel?
I don't think I don't want to speak, because every department's a little different, in terms of their flexibility and how they might manage and approach the reduction. These are not, so onerous and significant that I would expect that, but what might happen is units would keep vacant positions open and not fill them. And then obviously then you got to reassign that work.
We're looking at a 1% increase in tuition.
So we're at this point anywhere between 2.5% and 3.5%.
So 1%, just doing some quick math for in-state, I guess you got that up there? I'm sorry, I'm leading up.
We'll get there. Yeah,
I apologize.
Yeah, no, we'll get there. Yes. So we don't take tuition rate increases lightly. We look at, obviously, we want your input on it, but we also look at how we compare over time and how we've managed different tuition rate increases. So this is a look back at tuition changes that we've had. You'll notice since about fall 19, we kept tuition flat. There was a slight technical bump in fall 21. What that meant was we took a separate standalone fee at that time, rolled it up into tuition. So it looks like a bit of an increase, but it was a standalone fee that was being paid. We did that as part of our effort to standardize billing and make it a little easier to understand for students. Last year was the first year in about 5 that we saw a tuition rate increase. And these are keep looking at you, these are the Manhattan campus rates for undergrad and in-state. So Salina's a little different. If during that same period of time, you looked at it from, if we had adjusted rates in relation to the higher ed price index, which is another form of CPI, inflationary measures, you would have seen a 15% increase in costs over that period. So we worked very, very hard as an institution to make sure we kept tuition rates flat, even though we were experiencing significant inflation. We're also experiencing at that time enrollment decline. We also had a pandemic. So all those factors played into our efforts to really try to keep tuition as low as possible during that period. At the same time, we've worked hard to make sure that we're providing additional scholarshiping opportunities to students, especially in that need-based area. So fall 22, we had about 17 million in scholarships awarded to 6,000 students. We've been able to increase that 6% from fall 22 to fall 23. Again, recognizing that we're trying to provide access, working with our philanthropic partners at the K-State Foundation for additional need-based aid or scholarship opportunities for there. So those are that's just a look back at how we've managed tuition rate changes over a period of time. We also want to make sure that we're staying competitive with our peer institutions. So we don't want to do something that puts us way out of whack and impacts us potentially with other institutions that we're competing with. So this is fall 23, this is before any type of tuition rate increase would be considered, where we stack up against some of our competitors. So below KU, slightly above Arkansas, but still kind of in that middle range overall total cost of attendance. So we're looking at it from both the dining, required fees, tuition. We're looking at that full cost of attendance package. So we really look to make sure that we're staying competitive in the market. We're doing this analysis. So to your point, what's a 1% look like? We would, it'd be about $50 a semester for students for just tuition. You all have decided to keep student services fee flat next year, so there's no change in that. And then we've got our housing and dining changes that we approved last November by the board as well. So we have about a $50 per semester increase for next year. I'll give you a flavor of context. So as we've talked with our peer institutions or other K-Board institutions, everybody's coming in quite a bit higher than what we might be thinking of in terms of tuition rate increases. And they're also several of them are proposing student services fee increases. So that's the other factor that we look at too, is what are our other peer institutions doing and how that might then stack up and comparatively to the board ultimately is who we have to get that approval for tuition rate increase. So as I mentioned, we're at this point looking anywhere between 2.5 and 3.5. We'll be able to come back next Tuesday after we do some final deliberations and sort of be able to propose that final tuition rate increase. But that's kind of where we stand. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, that $50 increase, is that based on a 12 credit hour student?
15. I did the math.
15, okay. So it's gonna be anywhere between a $250 increase per semester and a $350 increase per semester, right? So it's really gonna 2.5 or 3.5
Per year. Per year.
Per year,
per year,
sorry. You were saying that.
per year or per semester.
$50 per semester, $100 per year per percent. So what 1% would be $100 increase, 3% would be a $300 increase per year.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was thinking, sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm taking your word.
What is the difference in, what's the deciding factor between 2.5 and 3.5 right now? What is that?
So part of it is doing the final sort of budget planning decisions. What is it exactly, how much we're gonna ultimately invest in the different areas, it's gonna come into play. And then we're still trying to figure out what's happening in the legislature as well. So even though they finished the regular session, one might back into play during omnibus. We won't know by the time we have to turn in the tuition rate proposal. But we want to keep an eye out to see what's happening there. Yeah.
How do the deans of the president's cabinet respond?
To this discussion?
Yeah. Wasn't that
Yeah, so
last week?
so we visited with, this morning actually, we visited with Dean sort of about all the plans. You know, it's always fun to deliver news that we're gonna cut budgets next year. That's always a challenge to do so, but everybody I think recognizes the needs that we have next year to invest in our people and also secure our environment. So again, the conversation being it's a balancing act between tuition, enrollment, cuts, what can we get from state funding, trying to bring that whole package together. So it's a balance as well for them.
It's more holistically my question. We're improving on state funding by a little bit at least. In restricted dollars, we're getting somewhere like that. Enrollment's probably projected to go up, maybe hopefully kind of sort of. How many years down the line of more budget increases do we think before we can stop with budget cuts? It sounds like all the things are trending in the right direction.
Yeah.
How close are we to the break even?
Yeah, so again, it's a balance every year. This year in particular, we opted to make as an institution a significant investment in the IT infrastructure. That's really driving a lot of the cost. And so we're investing in a core area that then means we have to take from other areas of the institution to balance that out. If we can start turning around the enrollment growth, I think, we would hopefully then be able to find those areas of investment, but then not have budget cuts as well. I don't have a specific answer for you. Every year is a balancing act, candidly, for us as we think about what are our investments in this kind of thing.
But it is a key part of our next gen strategic plan, right? So the president, the leadership understands we need to grow out of this situation. So that's that big number, 30,000 learners by 2030. And some of those are degree seeking students like all of you. Some of those are students that are afforded concurrent credit opportunities. Some of those are non-credit. Because a great deal of learning is produced at Kansas State that we haven't counted in the past. And so think about micro-credentials or John Deere coming in saying, I need every employee to go through this for a micro-credential. So looking at other streams of revenue that help us balance that out and get to that point quicker than putting everything on the backs of especially undergraduate on-campus students. We need to broaden the revenue.
Tremendous demographic challenges that to as opposed to some market expansion that would be occurring in other space.
It's just a dumb statement. There are some things just out of our control. We can't control inflation. We can't control a cyber attack. So we don't know what our future needs are until we get closer. And so, and we don't know the budgetary climate of the campus legislature. And so is there a desire to quit cutting into the base and quit taking money out of the departments so that they can be robust and give you the education you deserve? Absolutely. And I think there's an indication that the administration and the faculty are pushing so hard to give you bang for buck. When they presented this year, they said they didn't want a tuition, a fee increase, because we're working hard to crunch the numbers and be more efficient. So I don't think the administration, I'm speaking faculty, I don't think the administration can promise you that they have a crystal ball for the next 5 years.
I can guarantee you, no, I don't have a crystal ball.
And if I
I'd go to Vegas if I did.
if I overstate, but
No, you're spot on.
In which this is it's partially germane to what we've been discussing today, but just curious, when it comes to having a tuition increase proposal along with a student services fee increase proposal, do we know the historical context knowledge over how that's gone with like KBOR approving one or both or neither at any given time or whatever?
So just to clarity, there's no student services fee.
Correct. Yeah, and I'm so asking just in general, just for knowledge.
The hypothetically, it varies every year. KBOR is also very concerned about cost of attendance. It's in one of their, that's part of their board strategic plan. So the conversation is, the expectation is on each institution, if we were to bring something forward, we justify exactly what we're doing with those dollars and the need for them. And some years you get signals from the board that they're not willing to consider anything. Sometimes they're willing to consider potential increases, but every time you got to come in and validate what it is exactly you're doing. And they are going to be asking us, well, what about enrollment growth? What about other areas that you've been able to do within the budget to balance?
Thank you.
One thing I might ask is we've not publicly disclosed to colleges and departments outside of the deans about a lot of the information we've shared, but especially about the budget cuts. So I would just ask for your confidentiality in that. We want to make sure we've got our communications lined out appropriately. So I just ask for your confidentiality.
I was going to ask you how much I've been.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Do we have any other questions at this time? Just a reminder, there is going to be Q&A next week for decision. So as you think of questions, there'll be a chance to have those answered.
Feel free to send them in too.
Yeah.
Always.
And please do, if you come up with a question.
Specifically, it's, gonna be a question that requires them to, sort out numbers if they need to pull for you. I'm sure they'd be more than happy to with the time to do it.
Does the group the students want to talk about, gee, 1% doesn't sound that much, 300 a year, when you're talking $10,000, $20,000, depending on in-state or out of state or in a dorm, not a dorm. Does anybody have any gut reaction or any discussion or anybody want to share anything? Or are you just sort of still absorbing going, oh my God, what do I do with this?
At the end of the day, I don't think there's a huge difference between $50 and $100 to the student when they're looking at if there is a fee increase. Anything in between those numbers is not as substantive because it's a fee increase. No one's going to make a break decision based on $50 at the end of the day, most likely. And then I'm old and shaded from student services fee, but if we can provide a better education for an extra $300.
I have a quick question real quick. What is so say this were to pass, what is the procedure for notifying students that tuition is increasing?
That's a question. Usually we're working with Karen Reese's area from an enrollment management standpoint to communicate sort of what those costs are gonna look like for the next year. So I think the communication would generally come from her area, sort of providing that back out.
So I guess another question. So next week we'll do a little bit of Q&A and we'll vote.
Yes.
Will it be like, will the goal be to vote as in like this body recommends a 3%, like preferred increase, 3% increase, and then if not, then, or you know, are we gonna scaffold and rank our preferences, or like what's the?
I don't think we can.
Okay.
I imagine you'll have a number for us.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's just up or down, what's,
Or comment.
yeah.
Thank you.
Additional information. I did a quick search, I may be off, but I did a UC California and UC Virginia. You know, and you take a look at their annual costs, roughly equivalent to what's on here. Instead of being 10 or 11,000, it's 20, 21,000 a year. And so when you take a look, not just against our peer group, but nationally, how are we doing? We are getting students from the coast coming here, not just for the quality of education, but quality of education and because of our great bang for buck, if I can use that term, even using it out of state. It is interesting as a budget analyst. Sometimes you say, hey, is it a 1% across the board, or should we do a 1% here and a 2.5 here? Right now, we're using a 1% across the board. And I know in my heart of hearts that the president, our senior leadership has grappled with, do we target it or do we do it across the board? I know that. And those are really tough analysis, partly because you don't understand long-term the impacts on different groups, out of state or in state. And we're trying to do enrollment management, and those different pieces get real complicated real quick. Just want to reemphasize, this is a straight across 2.5%, 3% across the board. So what we gave you was the cost increase for in-state. It is more for grad school. It is more for out of state. Not trying to hide anything, but I know the senior leadership is very reluctant to do any increase, but they also have to provide you a good quality product. Any further? Can I touch base afterwards? I want to. Sure. But
Yeah. All right, seeing none, I will see everyone back here at the same time, back to the same place. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.